One way to think about it in terms of food and the body is we don't come into this world hating our bodies. We don't come into our world. Sonia Renee Taylor has this wonderful quote where she talks about toddlers don't come into the world lamenting the size of their thighs, right? But as a result of getting these messages from people and directly experiencing shaming and whatnot, parts of them start to feel less than, ashamed, anxious, and then other parts step in to try to protect us so that we don't have to feel that way, right? And so when that happens, parts become extreme in their thinking and their behavior, and other protectors then come in to try to balance out the extremity of that part. So we can talk more about that later. I'm sure we will. But, what happens is, the system becomes increasingly constrained by these protective strategies and by continued efforts to try to keep the vulnerable parts, which IFS refers to as exiles, out of awareness. And so one of the things that we talk about with IFS, an analogy that can be really helpful, is that the self is to burdened parts like the sun is to the clouds. So the self is there, that core healing wisdom is inside of us, but it's covered up by the clouds, right? It's covered up by the parts who are acting or feeling in extreme ways because of the painful or traumatic experiences that they went through. And so what IFS does is it releases, or it provides us with access to the self by getting to know the different burdened parts and healing them so they can revert back to their naturally healing essences, their natural healing states.
Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Vered Kogan, and it is an honor to introduce you to Dr. Jeanne Catanzaro. Jeanne is a clinical psychologist who has specialized in treating eating disorders and trauma for the past 25 years. She trained in psychodynamic psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR, before discovering the internal family systems model, also known as IFS. As an approved IFS consultant, she served as the director of a day treatment program for eating disorders for 2 years and has written 3 chapters on using IFS to treat eating disorders in several books. And she is also the author of the book Unburdened Eating, Healing Your Relationships with Food and Your Body Using an Internal Family Systems Approach, which will be out in September 2024 and can be ordered now on Amazon. And I'm really excited to receive my copy in a few weeks.
Right.
And Jeanne, it's really such an honor to have you here today. We got to meet in person at a retreat that you and Schwartz held, and it was a very transformational retreat for myself and my doctor who attended with me. And I want to thank you for that, and to thank you for being here today, because this topic is really on the minds and hearts of many people who are struggling to achieve the work that you do.
Yeah, very much. I mean, thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate having the chance to see you again and then to talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's important. Yeah. You're welcome.
So how about we start with what are some of the eating issues that you're seeing come up more often?
Oh, but I mean, what am I not seeing? I think when you really zoom, that kind of people are used to thinking about eating disorders, right? Like clinically significant eating disorders, like binge eating disorder or anorexia. And they're not really thinking about how eating and not eating are basic ways of comforting ourselves and of relieving stress. And so they're just basic to our experience as human beings. And we use them to help us cope with a wide variety of difficulties. And so inherently, that's not a problem. But we also live in a culture where there's so many messages about what we should be doing with food, what we should be doing with our bodies, that those natural ways of enjoying food or using food to soothe, alleviate stress and whatnot, we start to treat them as a problem. And so then we can start to develop things that we either feel are problematic, parts of us feel are problematic, or other people feel are problematic. And that's when a whole array of difficulties can arise, right? A whole number of people will come in and be complaining about a lot of different ways that their eating bothers them. Binge eating disorder, like during the pandemic in particular, right? There was a huge amount of focus on both elevating, cooking at home, making bread, pasta, all kinds of recipes. And that in one way, we celebrated food and eating in that way. But also right after that, tons of articles about weight gain, pandemic weight gain and binging and being out of control. And so right there, we got to see the two poles often of the struggle that comes up around food and eating. But, when I think about eating issues, I think about all the different beliefs we have about, all the things that we're taught to believe about our bodies, that they should be fitter, that they should be healthier, that we shouldn't age. We should, be, eating in certain ways and in ways and be able-bodied. I mean, there's just so many messages we get about what makes us good, right? And versus what makes us, failing in some way. So I think about eating issues. When you do get curious about eating issues, instead of looking at them just at the extremity of somebody who's not eating or somebody who's eating to the point of discomfort all the time, when you really consider all the different ways, it starts to really tell you a lot about how somebody's been treated, the messages that they've absorbed in their lives, and also the stress that they're under. So I think a lot right now, we're under a lot of stress. And I think at this point in time, there's so much inequity in the world, right? There's so many people who are just struggling and trying to make it and living with incredibly difficult circumstances, in addition to a good number of people who are living with a lot of food insecurity. So I think there's just a myriad of issues related to food and eating that we could explore. I mean, obviously not today, but that we could really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I certainly have some of these things that you mentioned myself, sometimes, of like eating at night, or especially when there's stress or I need to get stuff done. And then there's some guilt and shame. And, thankfully I have some tools to release that, and it's still there, which is why it's so interesting that, this concept of when is an issue, right? Because eating because of stress may not be an issue per se, unless there's also some narrative perhaps that goes along with it, or some health issue or something like that.
Exactly. I was just going to say, I guess the answer to your question is, who among us doesn't have some sort of eating issue is really the answer.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are moments for each of us where we're noticing that we are stressed out about the way we eat and how most people I know, I can't say everybody, but the significant majority of people that I know have parts of themselves that get critical or controlling about what they're doing with food or their body, right? And I think the issue is that, or the large issue is your question about what's an issue. The issue is that a lot of us don't see that as an issue. In other words, we don't think it's problematic to be plagued by a critic more or less all of the time to some degree. We just feel like that's appropriate, right? I will talk to people who say, well, shouldn't I be worried about what I'm eating? Shouldn't I want to be healthy? Right? So we don't really question the fact that we have a critical part who's really nagging us or making us feel pretty crappy when we do resort to food or, eating in a way that's really for soothing rather than for hunger, right? And this idea that that's bad to soothe anyway, right? Because we didn't berate ourselves for binging on Netflix during the pandemic. I didn't see any articles in the New York Times about how bad it was that we were binging on Netflix, right? I mean, that's a socially, sanctioned way of soothing or taking care of yourself or disconnecting. But if you were to say instead, I was soothing with bread, that's a real problem, right? So the question is, for me, is what if we could get to know the parts of ourselves that make it a problem, so that instead we could get curious, right? Because if it isn't actually a problem to be eating for soothing, reasons of soothing. But instead, really when you're soothing from stress or worry, whatever, with food, the real issue is that you're not really getting as directly probably to the worry or the fear, right? But we can all get really pretty preoccupied with the concern then about the eating, which takes us further away from the root of the problem. So what the internal family system model does, and what my approach to eating really looks at, is what can we do to really get to the things that are driving our eating, and also are driving our shame about our bodies and all of these shoulds that we carry, so that we can just get curious more and more about what's happening. Yeah.
And I imagine that people intuitively know that what you're sharing is true, in the sense that what's, the underlying the eating issues is really important to get to, because lots of people have dieted, yo-yo dieted, and they lose weight and they gain weight and they lose weight, or maybe they even have a surgery and then they get the weight back, which I know, a couple of people in my life like that too. And so you use the word parts, and some people listening might not yet be aware of what we mean by that, or the first approach. Would that be all right to just touch on that?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So, we're used to thinking of ourselves as monolithic. It's just, this is me. And what IFS does is it's based on this proposition that actually we're naturally comprised of many different parts. Like within each of us, there's a number of different sub-personalities that you can think of almost like people within you, each with a different temperament and age and range of thoughts and feelings. And that this isn't pathological or an aberration. This is something that's actually quite natural, normal. And that in addition to these parts, we have an inner healing essence, a core wisdom that IFS refers to as the self. And when you're in self, it's kind of like when you notice you're in a state of flow, like there's a calm, spacious energy. And what the self knows how to heal the parts and knows how to help the parts. And when you naturally, in ideal circumstances, there isn't a lot of stress or trauma in the system. So the parts get along relatively easy without much intervention from the self. But of course, we know that circumstances are almost never ideal. And each of us comes into the world, and because of different stressors, because of different traumas, parts of us get hurt. And when certain parts of us get hurt, other parts are forced to take on protective roles designed to keep those vulnerable parts, the ones that got hurt and were laden with shame, fear, worthlessness, terror, to keep those feelings out of our awareness, and also to keep us from being hurt again from the outside. So, one way to think about it in terms of food and the body is, we don't come into this world hating our bodies. We don't come into our world. Sonia Renee Taylor has this wonderful quote where she talks about toddlers don't come into the world lamenting the size of their thighs, right? But as a result of getting these messages from people and directly experiencing shaming and whatnot, parts of them start to feel less than, ashamed, anxious, and then other parts step in to try to protect us so that we don't have to feel that way. Right. And so when that happens, parts become extreme in their thinking and their behavior, and other protectors then come in to try to balance out the extremity of that part. So we can talk more about that later. I'm sure we will. But, what happens is, the system becomes increasingly constrained by these protective strategies and by continued efforts to try to keep the vulnerable parts, which IFS refers to as exiles, out of awareness. And so one of the things that we talk about with IFS, an analogy that can be really helpful, is that the self is to burdened parts like the sun is to the clouds. So the self is there, that core healing wisdom is inside of us, but it's covered up by the clouds, right? It's covered up by the parts who are acting or feeling in extreme ways because of the painful or traumatic experiences that they went through. And so what IFS does is it releases, or it um, provides us with access to the self by getting to know the different burdened parts and healing them so they can revert back to their naturally healing essences, their natural healing states. So that's IFS in, like a couple of minutes. Those are the basic premises.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. You did such a beautiful job of that. And I love the metaphor of the sun and the clouds,
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
establishes the parts. And I think the sun is radiating light and love and
Right.
that self too, because when we're self-led, when we're in self-energy, then it has that kind of positive radiating effect.
And I just wanted to add that um, the wonderfully hopeful thing about IFS is that this inner healing essence isn't damaged by trauma. So we don't build up the sun, right? The sun is the sun; it's always there. What we do is we get greater access to the sun on days when it's not cloudy, right? So with IFS, what we're doing is we're helping increase people's access to what's already in them, and you know the 8 C's of self, which the characteristics that we often associate are things like calm, curiosity, compassion, creativity, and it's not a matter of being completely led by the self or in self or completely dominated by parts. There's usually some degree to which you have access to the different parts of yourself. It's not like you need to pursue totally. You don't want to have every day be sunshine, really, right? There's kind of this going in and out, but in a state that is more unburdened, when you can unburden more of your parts, there's more of a easy flow between when parts come in to know which ones need help and when, and to then be able to engage them from that state of, calm openness.
Yeah, it's an incredible framework that is very accepting and loving, and it's almost like this totally loving, like unconditionally loving parental
Mhm.
figure that is
Right.
there for us all the time. And the way that
Right.
I love IFS is I know that I'm never alone because my self with a capital S,
That's right.
that part of me, as you said, the 8 C's, that is calm, that is creative, courageous, compassionate, and so on, is always there, right above the cloud, so to speak, for me to be able to access and to remember the truth of who I am. I think the key for me with IFS, and I use the IFS framework as well with clients, is really being what we call self-led, as you said, this wise part of us that is calm, that is able to think creatively and be courageous, and all of those wonderful qualities, is there to really soothe in a way to parent these little parts of us that may be perplexed, disturbed, scared, operating, as you said, out of some old beliefs. And maybe I'll share a quick example if that's okay. Sometimes it helps.
Would be great. Mhm.
So I shared with you a little bit before we started recording that last night, probably in some unconscious preparation for our conversation about eating, I had this massive urge to snack. And so I started to do that. I just allowed it because I wanted to see in part kind of what would happen. And it was a part of me when I was able to communicate with it, thanks to your guidance when you were guiding through a technique that I was listening to. I connected with a part that told me, it was it was a male voice, and it was very harsh. And it said, you have to eat. You can't stop, because I just kept filling my bowl with more like dry cereal. I was just snacking on cereal.
Mhm.
And I said, why are you here? And
Right.
it's very clearly because I need to make sure that you'll survive, that you'll eat. And then what came to my consciousness is, thanks to your guidance, is when I was little, my parents used to say, you have to finish your food. Because what about all the children in Ethiopia that don't get to eat, that don't have
Mhm.
a meal? And I remember that was always on my mind, like I have to eat. But some part of me somehow took that on as a very real, serious thing, that I might starve if I don't eat, even though, again,
That's
it's
right.
not rational. Thankfully, I
Right.
have food, and I had a nice dinner last night. I didn't need to eat. I wasn't
Mhm.
hungry. So when I was able to bring more of that self-energy, that self-loving energy, I was able to connect with that part and speak to it and understand why it's there. And really appreciate it, truly, truly appreciate its service for me and its protection for me.
Right.
I just need to help it because it was operating out of beliefs that are not really helpful to me anymore. They're not adaptive to the goals that I want to have, the lifestyle I want to live, the health I want to have. So, that's just one example. And of course, there are a whole bunch of parts that showed up last night about
Right.
that, but that's just one of the parts. And so I'm curious about, in using this approach with so many clients and patients over the years, what are you seeing in terms of some of the more dominant parts? And how do we help to soothe them so that we can soften some of the issues?
Okay, great. Well, first of all, what was a great example. And it helps me. I want to point out a couple of ways that parts of us get forced into these extreme roles. Is they take on burdens, right, or extreme beliefs, feelings, and energies, and we get them. And there are a couple of different kinds of burdens, different ways people get burdened. And what you were describing was an example of a legacy burden, which is from your parents, right? This belief somehow that there wouldn't be enough and you could starve, right? So that's something that even though you aren't directly starving, you were hearing about it, right? You were getting that message that was possible. And so a part of you took it in, and what you noticed, there's a part of you that was saying, well, it's not rational, but our parts are really, they're absorbing, right? We absorb all of these messages about what's okay and what's not. And then in addition, if you had grown up in a family where there really was starvation directly, that would be another example of where a part of you would got a burden through a direct experience. And then there's also the cultural legacy burdens, right? So in addition to the burdens you took on from your family, which also may have been a cultural legacy burden, we get burdens from the larger culture, which we just take in, based on everything we're seeing on television, everything we're hearing about, what we see represented in movies, things like that. Which bodies are seen as valuable and worthy in our culture, things like that. So that's great because what you were able to do also, that example beautifully illustrates what we do with the IFS model, which is to get really curious, right? To get really curious about, hey, what's going on that the part of me wants to eat so much cereal right now is saying you've got to keep going, right? And then you also got curious about its concerns about what I think you were saying this about what would happen if it stopped, right? If it didn't have you eat like this. And so that's exactly what we do, because a lot of times what people try to do, and I think when you ask me what kind of issues am I seeing, I'm really basically the amount of eating from distress to soothe stress, but also the stress of feeling like you're not measuring up in some way. That the response to eating itself, the response to I should be eating something differently. I mean, you cannot go online without seeing a million different ads or whatnot, Facebook, Instagram, tons and tons of reels about this diet, that diet, and all what you should be eating. And people get incredibly stressed out about that. It becomes the focus, I think, of a lot of the unhappiness in our lives or the stress. If I could just fix this, I'd be okay, right? If I could just do this right, I could be okay. So I think that, eating disorders have doubled, and the incidence of eating disorders have doubled over the last 20 years. And I think binge eating disorder, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it's rampant. And it makes sense that it is, because we don't at all get curious about the conditions that we're living with right now, the tremendous amount of stress in our lives and what we have access to. We don't get curious about it. We just add more stress, which is to say, what's wrong with me? Why can't I stop eating? Instead of, okay, maybe let me get curious here about it. Which parts of me are having a hard time right now? What do they really need from me? So, so really what you did was key, which is getting curious instead of critical, right? In that moment, or having another part that came in and said, fuck it, I'm just going to keep eating. Yeah. I'm just going to keep going and I don't care. And another part that started planning a new diet tomorrow. Because that's an example of the cycle people get into a lot, which is, I've messed up. Now I've got to start some new plan tomorrow, which of course, as soon as one part of you starts planning a diet, you can be pretty, how often do people start noticing they instantly feel hungry, or maybe it gives them a brief amount of relief to think about, I'll wake up tomorrow with a new plan. But, a day or two later, they're starting to feel antsy, they feel hungry, they're deprived, that kind of thing. So,
and it was so clear and so like polarizing yesterday. And what I mean by that, like I could feel the inner conflict. Like a part of me is like, no, don't do it. You're going to regret it. Don't do it. And then part of me is like, oh, do it. And the excuse was that you're going to talk to Jeanne tomorrow and this will be good conversation. Right. So that's my little excuse. So then he went on. And again, as I was reaching for the first, and every time I filled the little bowl, it was like, no, stop, no more. So, and all these other things showed up, right? Parts that were all of a sudden I realized that sometimes when I snack, it's because, I'm giving myself some free time. Let's say I'm just watching Netflix or, sitting on a massage chair, going for a walk, and like I need to eat in order to kind of tell myself that it's okay to not do something because I'm eating. So I'm busy.
That's right. Isn't that amazing? So it's very interesting because had you just judged it, you would never have gotten that information.
Yeah.
Right? You would have never gotten this key piece of information that a part of you doesn't feel it's so acceptable to just not do anything.
Yeah.
Right?
And when I brought in that self energy, when I got coherent and with your guidance about self energy, I realized, I had a conversation, for example, with the part that said, we got to eat because, there might not be another meal or there might not be enough. I kind of talked to it just like I would a little child and said, it's okay. Look, we've got a kitchen full of food. We're okay. If we need to, we can buy more food. I'll be all right. And with the other one, I said, it's okay. We can just allow ourselves to rest. It's okay. We don't have to eat, permission to not do anything for a little while. That's okay. But it had such a mission in life. Like you got to do, you can't just be. And so being was excused when I had something in my mouth. It's just doesn't make any logical sense. Yeah, this is what happened. And I want, for our listeners to just consider for themselves what some of their own parts might be saying. So I wonder if this might be a good time, Jeanne, maybe to guide people through something or ask them some questions.
Absolutely. I have a question for you, if you're not open to it, just let me know. But do you notice that you've mentioned a couple of times it isn't logical?
Yeah.
Right. And so I would guarantee you, and this before we do, I would definitely like to do an exercise. Before we do, you're giving me an opportunity to describe a little bit more carefully some of the key concepts here. And so it's helpful. But a part of you was saying it's not logical. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that all of the parts' actions make sense in their context. So it does make sense that there would be parts that would be worried about not having enough because the little parts of you, right, are stuck in the past where they remember being told there isn't enough. Look at these people who don't have enough food, right? And so young parts of you took that in as a very, as kids do, right? As a reality that there's starvation here and we might be subjected to it if we don't eat all of this, right? So the whole thing about, we're used to thinking about our parts. And this is where I didn't do a great job explaining it earlier, but this idea of parts is that they are sub-personalities with a range of thoughts and emotions. And if you think about them as little kids, little young beings, they're usually young, because that's when we're most vulnerable to being hurt. And they take on these extreme roles. But if you think of them as little kids, then you can get curious and you can get into a relationship with them and find out why it is that they believe what they do, why they do feel the way they do. Because when you're thinking about it from your logical thinking part, which we're so used to doing in our culture, you don't get all of that information this rich amount of information that you were able to get when you checked in with, you noticed where the parts were showing up, how they were speaking to you. It was a male voice, which is curious. It was a message that clearly came from other people, right? The parts of you took on. And it really left them feeling like with this urgency of I better eat or else I'm going to be starving. So it always makes sense. That's one thing when we consider the context in which the part took on the belief, feeling, or energy. And also our parts have positive intentions for us. even if it doesn't seem like that their intentions are inherently positive, even if it doesn't feel that way. So, right. So if you're shaming yourself, it may seem like, oh, well, that's just a waste and it's just painful. But when you get curious, you can get a sense of, like you did, like what would happen if you stopped doing this to me? And that's what we're going to do now for a minute or two, if that's okay, just to get curious about a part of yourself that focuses on food and your body. Right.
And I'm very grateful that you kind of paused there for a moment, because you're right. I mean, the part that, I said it's not logical, it doesn't make sense. That's kind of the me with my age, with what I've learned, with what I
Right.
know. Yet when I connected with those parts, I mean, this was very real, because that's what they know. As you said, they're frozen in time. And the young one that was telling me about that I need to eat because I need, it's we got a mission, we got something to do. That was a girl's voice, by the way. And I connected with.
Oh, that one was, right.
Yeah. And well, no, the other one was a male. This one was a female. And which is also interesting. And, and when I communicated with her yesterday, she showed me, I saw like an image of my dad being, when we lived in Denver, when I was a preteen, he was studying all the time. He was always in the basement studying. And he didn't take a lot of breaks. And so it was almost like I took on this, I need to stay focused, I need to study, or I need to work, and it's not okay to just take time off and not do something.
Right.
So it gave me its vision of the world, and it makes sense that it is
that's right,
guiding me to do that, because it wants me to be okay. I know it's a very loving part. And I appreciate her for what she's doing for me. And I want her to know it's okay. It's okay sometimes to take a break. That's okay. Yeah.
Perfect. So what you did, if I might just relay back to you what you did for those who are new to the model, which is you focused on the part, and instead of thinking about it, you connected with the part. So you got to know a couple of key protectors. And that second one is so common in our culture. And in my view, it's one of the guilt about indulging or just giving ourselves time to take a break. We're so often multitasking. We don't give ourselves time to really rest, right, and restore. And so you got to know the part. You got to know how it shows up. You got to know how old it was, right, a little bit and its gender. So, and with some compassion and curiosity, you could get a real sense of what its function was, what it's trying to help you with. And so the question becomes, if that part, as you befriend that part and you find you can get curious about what it's afraid would happen if it relaxed a bit, right, and didn't keep you so productive, what is it afraid would happen? And then you'll learn about which parts of you it's protecting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you could get to the parts that probably witnessed or felt judged in your family for when you weren't busy, when you weren't super productive.
Yeah. I mean, it said very clearly, you won't achieve your mission in life. You won't fulfill your higher purpose.
And then what?
Yeah.
Right. And then what? Then you can get to know the parts who are carrying some beliefs about themselves, some fears about what happens if you don't live up to that potential or that mission. And the goal, of course, is not to get rid of parts, but to help them so that they're not carrying these extreme beliefs and energies. In the present, you can address how the messages they took on in the past and help them update them that you're now, doing what you're doing, productive in the way that, you can be productive in a way that feels good and isn't extreme or fear driven.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I love the name of your book is Unburdened Eating, in terms of how to release those burdens that are driving the emotions around eating and the healthy aspects of eating.
Right. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. So, well, that was a great example. I'm so glad your parts geared you up for today. So what if we just, I was going to say that unburdened eating, because we take on so many messages about food in our bodies, and some are extreme, like you just were able to acknowledge the feelings about not having enough. And if you've grown up in a culture where that, or in a system where that's a reality or has been a reality for your ancestors, that's a really potent one for people. And then there are the more day to day as you unburden and you're not, parts of you aren't as connecting as much of your worth or sense of self to what you eat or what your body looks like. Even some of the day to day decisions people make about food can get stressful. And so, unburdened eating is also just a practice of getting to know the different parts of yourself who want different things and helping them get along more harmoniously. I maybe we'll just start with a critical part because you and I talked about how we can do maybe an exercise to help people get to know a protector. And you might notice different protectors that focus on food in the body, like a critic, a critic who's telling you, how you're not doing it right, or, you should look a certain way. You might also have protectors that, as you noticed, can urge you to eat more in response to stress. So just to maybe what we can do is take a couple of minutes. Most everybody has a critical part, when it comes to a lot of things, but food in particular, food in their body. And so I'll just take you through like a brief, if that's okay. We have time for a brief. And what we do when we do IFS is usually it helps to shift your attention inside, to sometimes closing your eyes if that helps, and feeling yourself in the chair and, just bringing your attention inside and seeing, our parts show up in different thoughts, images, feelings, and sensations. So, just taking a moment to see who's there, see what thoughts or feelings or sensations you're aware of. There may be a part of you who's like a drill sergeant who tells you what to do, tells you to get to the gym. There's a part of you, like you noticed a part that says it's not okay to just relax. I really should be doing something. Just see if you can get curious about what you notice. And a protective part, a part who tries to get you to do or be a certain way. Just see if there's one you're curious about. You'd like to get to know a little bit. There's no right or wrong here. You just want to see who's present. And when you do get a sense of the part you'd like to get to know a little bit better, just see if there are other parts of you who don't like that part. And if there are any parts who don't like that one that you've chosen, just see if you can ask them if they'd give you some space. We just want to give you a little room. We just want to get to know this part a little bit better. So to find out a little bit more about why it does what it does and what it fears would happen if it didn't do this to you. And just seeing if you can get curious. And if you cannot get curious, it's another part. And so if you can't get curious about the part you chose, then just shift your focus to this other part and see if you can get curious about that one. And so now I'm going to invite you to notice how the part shows up in or around your body, the one that you're wanting to get to know. Right? How do you know this part is around? Are there certain feelings or sensations? You may notice a tension or a jitteriness. You may notice your breathing changes. It's more shallow, or certain thoughts or judgments going through your head. And if that's the case, you could just notice the kind of thoughts or judgments. What does this part say to you? And just taking a moment to see how you feel towards the part, right? Just checking to see, do you have some openness or curiosity about this part and what it's trying to do for you? And if you do have some curiosity, ask this part how old it is and how long has it been doing what it does. See if it will tell you what it's trying to do for you with this criticism or by focusing you on how you eat or on a certain part of your body. You might be able to see this part. You might get an image in your mind's eye, or you might just sense it, right? And just see if you can send it some openness or compassion, just inviting it to tell you a little bit more about how it got to into this role and why. What led it to take on this job it's been trying to do for you. Are there parts of you it protects by doing this job? What would happen if it didn't criticize you or try to get you to change? Let it know you appreciate that it's been trying to help you, even if some parts of you haven't, don't like it, or don't appreciate it, that you get it's been trying to help you. And just making room for it to tell you what it's afraid would happen if it didn't keep doing this, if it shifted out of its role. And it may say, I just need to do this. I really believe I need to do this. Just see if you can keep being curious about what makes it believe that. And also, you might want to let it know that, ask it if it knew that you could actually help. So you could be with the parts it's been trying to protect. So it could shift out of this role. Would it be interested? Would it like to do something else for you inside your system if it didn't have to do this? You might ask it if it enjoys criticizing you or focusing on food and the body, if they should change them. Just taking a moment to see if there's anything else this part wants you to know about it, what it's been trying to do for you, what it's concerned would happen if it didn't do this or eased up even if it just eased up a little bit. And again, just extending some appreciation to this part for what it's been trying to do for you. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to shift your attention back outside. But first, just thank this part for whatever it's been able to share with you about its role, about its fears, whatever else it was able to share. Yeah, when that feels complete, you can bring your attention back outside. It was just a little dip in, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Jeanne.
You're welcome.
I imagine that, those listenings that followed your guidance, I imagine we're able to connect with some little ones. I was able to connect with a little two-year-old,
Mhm.
and her role for me, if I may share really quickly, was
Great.
like she's the one who's like, you need to eat chocolate at the end,
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
just end dinners. And but it's oftentimes like really strong, like to the point
Uh-huh.
that if I don't have, like, I'll go buy something, or
Right.
like it can get pretty strong, that craving.
Uh-huh.
And so I connected with her, and we had a conversation, and for her it represented freedom. Like the ability
Uh-huh.
to have that was like her being free and having choice and being able to assert herself. And there was something that happened when it was just fascinating conversation. And now I understand why she insists that I have
Mhm.
chocolate, because it's not about the chocolate. It's about being
Right.
able to assert and express her needs and to have the freedom to have what
Right.
she wants. Um, it's just
Right.
amazing. It's interesting. As I connect with more of these parts, I can see in every case, it's not about the thing. It's about what it
Right.
means. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. That's the whole thing. We get really focused on um food or eating or not eating, or but really getting a sense of what is it, what's underneath it, what's driving it, right? And that's a very big for that 2-year-old, think about 2-year-olds that's when they start to assert themselves, right?
Wow.
Kind of to have a sense of their own agency. And so clearly you're getting to know something about a part, right, who was feeling some tension around that,
Yeah.
right? And that this is the way to get it, right? So it's really fascinating. And I think that's the thing. I just had thought about it so clearly that the way we view our own and other people's bodies, the way we view our own and treat our own body says a lot about what we've experienced and how we've been treated, right? And if we stay concrete at the level of, food and weight, we lose so much information. So, and you have a lot of access to what we've been calling self-energy, which is that inner wisdom, which is characterized by the 8Cs, which you've mentioned a couple of, but I think I might, if you don't mind, just expand a little bit with, there's a clarity, there's a compassion, a calmness, right? There's a connectedness and a creativity. All of those 8Cs, we call them, are aspects of self-energy. And there's a spaciousness to that. If you noticed when you describe your experience of getting to know that 2-year-old part that really urges you to have chocolate, the key to this, Merit, is that there isn't a critic. You didn't have a critical part coming in saying, I hate that part. I can't stand her. She ruins everything by making me get the chocolate. And that's key. Because when you asked me before, what do I see? That's the number one thing I see with eating issues, which is a lot of criticism. And the criticism blocks us from our core wisdom, certainly, because when we're dominated with the criticism or the shoulds, we can't be curious. We can't listen. We can't hear what's going on with these other parts and why they're doing or urging us to do or eat in certain ways. And so, that's a very important part to get to know. So,
yeah. And it was really hard to be angry at her because all I see is this little 2-year-old with chocolate all over her face. She was so cute.
Yeah.
And that part of it too is when I go in understanding this concept of self and parts, and I know that she's doing the best that she can. And she's just a little one. She can't, and I speak to her like she's 2 in this case. And because I know that she doesn't know all the things that I know. She hasn't had the experiences that I've had. So I go in and, just with curiosity. And once I see why she's there, I just had a tremendous amount of gratitude for her. Like, here's a sweet little 2-year-old that rather than being out playing and doing what 2-year-olds do, she is, hyper focused on making sure that I'm safe, that I have the freedom, because freedom is one of my top values. And so this is her way to be able to protect me, to make sure that I have that. And I just have a tremendous amount of gratitude and love.
Right. Right. And because that part of you could feel it, she was much more willing to share, tell you about herself. If you think about it, IFS works best when you actually think about this as inner people. When you think about being with a little girl, right? And you're relating to her and getting curious, and it can sound hokey, right? To folks who are listening, it might sound really hokey. But when you really approach IFS in this way, and you really consider that parts of us get hurt when we're young, and they are stuck in the past, and when they get to know who we are now, and that right now, like you just said, it's a really important value of yours, freedom. And so this part of you is living perhaps at a time where there wasn't as much freedom, right? For her. And that this is one of the ways that she could assert that for you, get freedom. And so when you're getting to know this part and helping her trust that actually, she doesn't have to do this for you now, you can get curious about, are there ways in which other parts of you aren't feeling as much freedom, right? So that, and that might help her be a little less focused on the chocolate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. I hope that's okay to explore this with you a little bit. I sense that it is. You've been so open with.
Of course, I'm grateful. And my hope in this is that this is helpful to those listening. that may have something similar or their own version of that. And I think one of the things that I am so respectful and grateful for IFS about is the fact that it is such a loving approach. There's so many things out there that talk about these as saboteurs, this part of me that's doing this horrible,
Exactly.
making me. And I've learned that there are really, and just like the title of Dick Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts,
Right.
there are no bad parts. And
No. Right.
I know now that if there is a habit I don't like or something that's
Right.
working out, that it's stemming from a very loving part of me that's trying to protect me from something.
Right.
Maybe
There's always a reason.
emotions or.
Mhm.
And so, if you don't mind, just for a little bit, what about those that have, severe eating disorders beyond kind of stress eating or that kind of thing? How can
Mhm.
IFS be helpful for that?
Well, what we're talking about is hugely, um, it's just crucial in the treatment of eating disorders, that are more extreme. This kindness and this compassion and this clarity that these things are happening for a reason, right? That these parts and what you talked about also, we were talking about these polarizations. One of the things that happens when a part is forced into an extreme role is that as it takes on an extreme role, other parts naturally will go to the opposite extreme to balance out the activity of that one. So you notice you have one part who wants it one way and another part who will go to, adopt an opposing kind of strategy. So you have a part that wants you to lose weight and will get you to diet, and then another part that binges to get some relief from the deprivation. Right. So it's very natural to have these polarizations when parts of us get burdened. We also have alliances internally also, that parts can form alliances, so that I'm imagining that there are a couple of parts inside of your system who don't mind the part that gets chocolate at the end of a meal, that will go out and get it, in fact, if need be, right?
Yeah.
There's some parts that may rely on that. And so getting a sense of the different parts and how they relate to each other is really key here. When you have a clinically significant eating disorder, there's always some important reason why parts have taken on these extreme roles. And as the protective strategy becomes more extreme, it elicits a more extreme response from a polarized protector. So there's always these internal struggles between parts who are trying to get control over the system and to control in some way, and the parts who are trying to rest free of the control. So that's where you see a lot of the restricting and then binging, for example, that comes with binge eating disorder and also bulimia. And also with anorexia, a lot of times people try to exile their hunger. It doesn't mean it's not there. It's just not in awareness. Right. So, so really what IFS does, and, IFS was developed as a result of Dick Schwartz's treatment of eating disorders. That's how the model developed, because he could see that organically, as he listened to his clients, that they had these different parts. And when he helped them get into a relationship with them, instead of trying to get rid of them or control them, because that's been the traditional approach in eating disorder treatment, which is to try to control or eliminate the symptoms. And the symptoms are the activity of the protectors. And so what we do in IFS instead, what he did was he got curious about these different behaviors, these different parts. And when he got curious, these parts would reveal why they were doing what they were doing. Well, binging helps me not have to feel anything about what's going on, right? Or throwing up, purging helps me feel calm, right? It helps me feel sleepy. I don't have to, again, when you get curious, parts will share with you very important reasons that make sense, right? Or at least made sense at one time, right? And oftentimes they still do. And so what IFS does is it brings this approach of compassion, the clarity that there are positive intentions, and also the fact that when you heal the exiles that these protectors are designed to keep out of awareness or keep safe from more harm in the external world, that's when the protectors are willing to let go of their protective strategies, right? So if I have exiles who feel like exiles are vulnerable parts of the system that get hurt when we're very young, those are the parts that our protectors are trying to keep out of our conscious awareness and also out of sight from the people around us, right? So when we heal those parts, then the protectors don't have to keep doing what they're doing. So that's ultimately the goal in IFS, is to get to know the vulnerable parts who got hurt in the past and go to them directly and see what they need, right? So that then the protectors don't have to do that. And eating disorder treatment that focuses on this model, it's a very hopeful approach, and it also is very empowering, because it's not the therapist who's going to tell the person what to do to get better. It's the person who's going to get curious about their own system, get to know their own parts, right? And become, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, self-led, meaning to be able to relate to those parts more of the time from this inner core wisdom that's characterized by these 8C characteristics, like calm, curiosity, and compassion. So it's a very empowering model instead of one that's pathologizing. And so that really, and again, also to anybody who's struggling with these maybe more subtle manifestations of eating issues, they're painful, and they happen for good reason. And if you can bring compassion to it, it's a real game changer.
Yeah. It is. And so I want to, for a moment, bring direction to your book.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit more of what's in there and how what's in there can help people.
I think the biggest thing with this book is the drawing attention to what we were talking about before, which is a lot of people tend to think about eating issues as something more in the eating disorder realm, and we don't think about how many more subtle manifestations of the shame or the judgments or the pressure that we carry related to food in our bodies are really what we call trailheads, or ways, or they lead to more substantial emotional issues in our lives, whether it's some feeling of low self-worth that we picked up along the way, or stress related to not feeling like we're measuring up at work, or an imbalance with our work-life stress, right? That I think the book really looks at all the ways in which we've been made to take on beliefs and feelings about our bodies, and very specifically with regard to our social location, because depending, in our culture, certain bodies are seen as valuable and worthy, and white, young, fit, able-bodied male, right? There's a lot of emphasis on those being the most acceptable, and then for those of us who veer from that, right? Lots of different parts who take on extreme beliefs or feelings or roles designed to help us become more acceptable. And a lot of the cultural legacy burdens that I think a lot of the folks listening to this podcast can relate to, like the importance of productivity and success and individual, work hard, no pain, no gain kind of thing, right? Which really results in, really shapes how we treat our bodies. Like, we don't get enough sleep. We're always on the go. We should be ready for the next challenge, right? We're not very compassionate with our bodies. We're not supposed to age, right? We have a lot of very strong beliefs in terms of success or failure related to health, right? If we get sick, there's something we did wrong. So there are lots of beliefs that we take on from our cultures, from our families, from our direct experience. And so my book really looks at what are the lenses through which you see your own and others' bodies, and how can you start to get curious about those so that you can feel, you can relate to your body in a much less extreme and painful way, and also ultimately to really consider the conditions that are creating painful, extreme circumstances for people in other bodies, right? Specifically people who are from marginalized groups, etc., and so that we can try to create the conditions for healing, globally. So that's really what the book is about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thank you so much for sharing what you shared today. And of course, for the book, because I think kind of how you ended there, right? Like healing globally. I mean, this is an issue that many people struggle with. And when they're able to have tools, as IFS is offering, to go inward and befriend these parts of themselves that are, as you called, protectors or managers that need them to take on this habit of eating, not eating, whatever that is, that they're able to befriend and create rapport and a relationship to communicate with them. And then that has a ripple effect well beyond even just the health aspect of their life. It's about self-compassion, self-love, self-acceptance.
Right.
And then, of course, that has a ripple effect to being more accepting of other people in our life, and to model to them how to be self-accepting and self-compassionate of themselves. And then,
Right.
continues and continues to heal our planet. Because when we're in a state where we are able to accept ourselves and love ourselves, then we're making better business decisions, better, all decisions that are really, again, stemming from a higher place, a more higher, energetic place.
Right. And I want to name this, and a big part of this book is, and we're doing this in a short period of time, but a big point of this book is really acknowledging that in our cultures, both, family, ethnic group, larger culture, the business culture, right? There are a lot of reasons, very good reasons, that parts of us are afraid of letting go of their protective strategies, right? Like being thin in our culture, being thin, being fit, being healthy, all of those things equate with what, a lot of us equate with success, right? And so, not showing signs that you are a weekend warrior or that you're working 60 hours a week. I have colleagues who are in their 60s who it's a matter of pride in a way that they're working as many hours as they are, right? There isn't a sense of but letting up a bit and not being as productive is really scary for protectors in their system, because it's the sense of I'm only as worthy as my productivity indicates. And so I think a lot of people, when they start getting into a relationship with the parts that hold those fears, it can help them trust that maybe we can ease up a little bit. But those are very real in our culture. And I think a lot of us have this idea that, well, it's just me and my individual behavior. But we all know that moment when we're walking across the room and somebody gives us the once over, right? And we have a sense that we're being assessed, especially I think people who grow up, who are assigned female at birth and, or socialized as women and are evaluated. But it's not just women. I mean, it's really across the board, the kind of assessment that we can feel. So, the more work we do with our individual systems to create some safety internally and being more accepting and compassionate, the more that generates outward. And over time, hopefully we'll create more of a world where it isn't just as difficult, as scary, to make these changes.
And as judgmental, because it creates that pause as we do this work. We may still have that thought about the person, about whatever, but at least we can pause for a moment.
Exactly.
And, where did that even come from?
Exactly.
That's not me. That's not self. That's
exactly.
And then we can get curious about that part.
Right. Exactly. Right.
So this is really, really important work, Jeanne.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for letting me talk about it for this period. Yeah.
Of course, on a personal note, it was very helpful to me, and I'm very grateful on behalf of all of our listeners that you shared what you shared and guided us through an exercise, because really the best way to learn is to have an experience, and you've given that to us. And I know that people can access many additional videos, of course, online on YouTube generally, for IFS and
Yeah.
To work
Yes.
with an IFS practitioner that
That's
can help
right.
them, of course, get the book and also to access your website. So tell us a little bit more about how people can learn about IFS and about you.
Okay, really great. So I think that the resources you just named are great. I think going to the IFS Institute, which is ifs-institute.com, and there's a whole bunch of information about IFS there. And I think there's an online circle program that's on-demand learning that gives you the basics of the IFS model. There's tons of videos online. There's some free meditations on Insight Timer that Dick Schwartz does and will help you do some of what we did today, like getting to know a part. That's great to do. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So I'm going to encourage people to do that. Lots of really great IFS practitioners. I think the best way to learn to experience IFS, to learn it is to experience it. So if you can get a session with somebody, but these videos, there's so many videos that are really great that will take you through some experiential exercises, and then you'll start to get a sense of it. And of course, doing some of the reading. No Bad Parts, Dick Schwartz's book is a particularly good one. I don't know if you've read it. It's really...
Every one of my clients has it. I bought probably like 100 of these over just so much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really helpful. So that's one of them. I'm hoping that my book will feel helpful to people in Unburdened Eating. But I also really like the book, You're the One You've Been Waiting For, which is a book about couples, but it's also got the first few chapters will really give you a good explanation about the internal family system model. So, and then there are a couple of workbooks that you can get through Amazon. There's one on trauma. There's one on addictions. That's really quite good. So those are two other options to check into.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Jeanne.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Hi, Game Changers. It's Vered, and I'm so thrilled that you got to hear from Jeanne Catanzaro about how to have an even healthier relationship with food and with your body through the internal family systems or IFS framework. If you want to learn even more about IFS, I invite you to check out my episode with Dr. Richard Schwartz about internal family systems and about what we call self-leadership, capital S, self-leadership. Which of course you learned from Jeanne about how to bring even more of that self-energy to love and soothe all of the parts of us. And he too guided through an exercise that I imagine will be very, very helpful for you. So all my love, thank you for your willingness to learn and to grow. And like I said, to create even more harmony within, which will create even more harmony in our world. So all my love. Bye for now.